Now we are going to start the civics unit, that is democracy in the contemporary world. This is the first unit which we are going to start in class 9. So the class 9 actually deals with the practical examples and clearly explains what is the term meaning of the word democracy and how is practically applicable to that. Is in the present day world the democracy practically followed, to how far it is followed? This all will be discussed in this unit. Let us see two examples under the heading of two tales of democracy. The two tales of democracy. Let us fix with the first one, the country called Chile. Chile is a small country which is located along the western coast of South America. This country had its presidential elections in 1970. Salvador Allende has participated with the party name called Socialist Party of Chile in the presidential elections which were conducted in 1970 and was victorious in this. After he became victorious in the presidential elections in 1970, he formed the government and he started to reframe the policies and he brought certain reforms in the administration. So the main important reforms what he brought are: first, he brought free milk and education for the children. Second major reform what he brought was providing land to the landless poor farmers. The third major one what he brought was the natural resources which are under the control of the foreign companies. He started to oppose this one. The major reforms which he brought in 1970 after he was victorious in the presidential elections gained him a lot of charisma in the entire country, as he provided education and free milk to the children, as well as providing land to the landless poor farmers, and also holding the control of the natural resources and not allowing any of the foreign companies to exploit the natural resources of Chile without getting any benefit to the country. So these policies are actually true benefit policies to the people of Chile, especially to the poor people, especially to the children, and especially for the country's progress and development, which he targeted a larger community of people, especially the people, those who are suffering with pain. But in practicality, when we talk about democracy, we have most of the population coming under poor people, but still the few rich people are always dominating. The few rich landlords who are present in Chile were angry with the reforms which were brought by Salvador Allende. Why are they angry? What was their problem? They are angry because he is not allowing any of the foreign national companies to come and do business, which is really hurting their business. And the second point, he is grabbing the lands of the rich and distributing them to the poor, which is really cannot be acceptable to them. And he also reduced the authority of the church, and the lands of the church were confiscated. This all brought a clear variation and triggered the anger towards Allende. So what happened then? So after Allende promised and started to take the reforms which triggered the anger of the rich landlords and the church authorities, which led to a military coup in 1973. The date was 11th September 1973. The day, as usually, the defense minister arrived to his office. The then present officers have arrested the defense minister. The military approached the president. The military is very angry with the president's rule, so they approached the president and requested him to resign, as he gave a deaf note to that one. he did not respond positively. In return, he went and gave a message on air saying that he is going to give a sacrifice, and he told already that one day or the other day definitely we will get democracy back. So in the first words what we have read of the lesson beginning, that is what he talked about the sacrifice, is that's what he meant here when he told that he is going to be killed by the military. He knew that one. So when he refused to give his resignation, the military surrounded the president's house and started to bombard it. After bombing this one, the president was killed in that attack. With this, the great legendary ruler Salvador Allende came to an end. He was not met with an accident. He was not met with a natural death. He was killed with a conspiracy. Now let us move on to understand who was the military general who came to power after him. He is none other than the General Augusto Pinochet. General Augusto Pinochet was backed, supported by the US forces. That's how he is able to manage and finish off the story of Salvador Allende. And after he came to power, he continued to be in power as a president. Though he is a military officer, he took over the presidentship for the next 17 years because he is backed by United States. And then the Pinochet's rule was considered as a black spot in the ruling of Chile. Why? Because he tortured many people. He killed many people. He also pressurized people to come and leave the idea of restoration of democracy. He is dead against the ideology of democracy. He do not want the democracy to come back in Chile. So he pressurized the people, even the higher-most officials of Air Force, like for example, Alberto Bachelet. When he refused to join his group, his wife and his daughter were imprisoned and tortured. He used to torture people, he used to kill people. They killed nearly 3,000 people who are not supporting against democracy, who want to restore democracy, were targeted and tortured. Finally, we don't know how many went on missing, where there was no message about them. So this was the special rule of Augusto Pinochet. Finally, Augusto Pinochet's rule came to an end in 1988 when he conducted a referendum. He was in the opinion that people would say yes for his rule, but people who have seen Allende's rule, who have experienced the real leader's vision towards his countrymen, so they has clearly given a mandate. The people of Chile directly refused and gave the mandate no to Pinochet, with which the democracy has been restored. As I mentioned earlier, Alberto Bachelet, the Air Force commander who refused to join the group of the Pinochet, and his wife and the daughter has been imprisoned and tortured. Later, the daughter of Alberto Bachelet comes in to the picture. What did she do? So, the daughter of Bachelet, the commander, Michelle Bachelet, who was a medical doctor, and she was the first defense minister in the Latin American countries. She, in 2006, was elected as the president of Chile in the presidential elections. In competition to her, she defeated the richest man in Chile. So, this clearly reveals for us that she also gives that perfect democracy has been restored in Chile. And in her victory speech, she clearly states that I have been a victim of hatred. So I have dedicated myself to change that into a tolerance and understanding, and also to change it into that hatred into love. So that's how she wants to change So the democracy has got completely restored in Chile from the state where already democracy is present in 1970s. Allende brought democracy, got elected in a democratic way. People gave a clear mandate for him. He started to make reforms to do and better things towards the people's benefit, which was not liked by few people and which triggered to a military coup in 1973, where then Pinochet enters into the scene and Pinochet kills the president with an attack. That's a conspiracy. Later he ruled for 17 years, torturing the people, killing the people and forcing them to follow anti-democratic methods. Finally the people have given a clear mandate when he conducted a referendum, thinking in a view that he would get a positive response from the people. But people has clearly stated no because of his cowardness, because of his treason, because of his felony, what he has done towards the President Allende. Afterwards, the presidential elections were again conducted, wherein the clear victory has been given to Michelle Bachelet in 2006, which made her to be the president and the first woman president and also the first defense minister in the previous cabinets, which ranks her to be a special. And she always remembers the painful days what she has gone through. This is a tale of democracy, the first tale. Let's move on to the second tale. The democracy in Poland is coming for us as the next tale, the two tales. One we have discussed about Chile. Now let us move on towards the east, that is Poland. In Poland, we actually have the ruling done by the Polish United Workers' Party. The Polish United Workers' Party is actually an ally to the Communist Party. In this, we have a different set of rules what the people have to follow here. What are those different set of rules? The different set of rules are: 1. We do not have any other party in existence and there is no choice for the people. When there is only one party, you are forced to elect only that particular party. And also, you do not have any choice to choose the leaders. You have a limited section of candidates standing or contesting for the elections, which makes it very clear for us that we are forced to choose a particular section of people or a particular political party. If you raise your voice, if you start to voice anything against the government, immediately you are put into prison, which is like a dictatorship where your voice is being crushed, your voice to be kept silent. So if you try to raise your voice against the government, you do not have choice, you do not have any other political party. It is like a semi-dictatorship, only one party rule. So it clearly shows for us that we have the influence of Communist Party over here. Yes, we have the Poland Party, Polish Workers' Party is being backed up by the Communist Party of United Soviet Socialistic Republic. The Union of Soviet Socialistic Republics, USSR, is backing up the particular Polish Workers, United Workers' Party, where it is clearly running the similar lines how the Communist Party runs its government in USSR. So, how can democracy step in here? Now, after the Poland is getting backed up by USSR, the situation started to change slowly. With a small incident, the issue got triggered up to a larger wave of a strike. What was that incident? It was on 14th August 1980. It was at the shipyard, the Lenin shipyard at Gansk. This Lenin shipyard at Gansk was having a similar experience, that is, if you raise your voice against the government, you will be put behind the prison. If you are an employee, if you are a worker, when you are working for a wage, if you demand for a higher wage, definitely you will be put out of your work. That was the experience of Lech Walesa. Lech Walesa in 1976, who was working as an electrician, in the Lenin shipyard was dismissed. The reason for his dismissal was that he was actually asking for a higher pay. So his demand for higher pay made the authorities to put him away from the work, and they dismissed him. So similar incident met him to a female crane operator was dismissed without any solid reason. So when she was dismissed, the family was in trouble. The person who already experienced this pain came up and started a strike. Actually, here you are not supposed to have any strikes. In Poland, any strikes other than the ruling party are not allowed. So any strike is illegal. So Lech Walesia's attempt to do a strike has started to be considered illegal. But as the atrocities of the governments are increasing day by day, the people, especially the workers, started to stage dharnas at various places. So now Lech Walesia, who initially started only for getting justice for the female crane worker, emerged as a new leader and started to demand more points, that is like independent trade unions to be set up. Next, release of the political prisoners who are imprisoned, and the end of the censorship on the press. So these demands started to get more and more appeal from the people. As the strike went on to a very large scale and it became a very huge strike, so this massive wave from the workers forced the government to come to an agreement under the leadership of Lech Walesia. Lech Walesia signed a 21-point program of agreement with the government of Poland. With that, he got an approval. As we mentioned earlier, the three major things what Lech Walesia demanded was independent trade unions to be set up, release of the political prisoners, and to end up the censorship on press. So he got the authority to establish a trade union, which he established on the name of Solidarity. The Solidarity was the name of the union which was being established by Lech Walesia. After Lech Walesia established the unit, there were many things which were revealed outside about the government. The governments continuously involved in the mismanagement of the funds, where it became a big headache as a freedom of press has been started. Press started to report all these things to the people. People started to get anger towards the activities of the government. So, angered with the actions of the people and Lech Walesia, General Jaruzelski, the then ruler of Poland, General Jaruzelski, started to impose on December 1981 the martial law. The martial law is a law which restricts free movement, which restricts the freedom of press, which restricts the trade unions again to a normal level. So, before the agreement, we have the similar situations. Now, with the imposition of the martial law by General Jaruzelski, again we got back to the same situation. So, again we have strike in 1988 with the leadership of Lech Walesia. Lech Walesia is already an emerged leader who had a huge support from the people. Obviously, this became a very large and massive strike all along the country. So as a strike grew on larger and larger, people started to support this one. The country which is supporting Poland to run in these lines, USSR, was also trembling with the economic crisis there. So the backup from the USSR was no more available to Poland. So finally, Poland has to go for free elections in 1989. So when the elections emerged, the one and only one emerging leader, Lech Walesia, emerged and received a massive mandate from the people by securing 99 out of 100 seats, and Lech Walesia turns to be the next president of Poland. So Poland initially do not have democracy. Poland is ruled by the guidelines of the Communist Party under the name of the Poland United Workers Party. But later democracy got stepped in here and settled here in Poland. So let us discuss the similarities of the two tales of democracy. Two features of democracy. The two features of democracy, the two tales what we have just now discussed, that is the concept of emerging from democracy, falling into the hands of military rule, then again re-emerging into a democratic nation, Chile, where Allende had a brief ideology of what democracy stands for, and we have seen how the rule went on. Here the Pinochet who took over the Allende's rule was not having any people support, just having only the military support. Whereas coming towards the Poland's issue, Poland is ruled by a political party and it is actually ruling on behalf of the Poland workers people. So it is claiming that it has the workers support. Lech Walesa do not want the market to be disturbed by the government. He want a free market. Whereas Allende wanted that to be at the cost or the control of the government. Lech Walesa opposed this one, whereas Allende supported this one. Michel was somewhere in the middle. So we have certain differences, at the same time certain similarities. Now from these two tales, what are the things which are claiming that there is no democracy either in Chile or in Poland are, that is, people are not electing their rulers, people do not have any choice to elect their rulers. Whereas coming towards the next point, there is no real freedom. There is no freedom to express, there is no freedom of opinion. So there is no freedom at all. Well, I am coming to understand about the democracy. Yes, what is the democracy that is offering? Why is democracy to be called as the best government of the modern times? Because it gives the choice to the people to elect their leaders. Only the elected leaders can rule the people. Well, the other thing is democracy always provides freedom of press, freedom of expression. You can express, you can protest, you can do strikes, you have trade union authorities to express your opinions, and this way the people's anger can be brought outside on any issue, so that the issue can be corrected by the government even though it does any mistakes. These are the two main understandings of the two tales of democracy. The changing map of democracy. This, as we discussed, that the democracy is growing. If you look at the maps which are given for us, that is from 19th century, initially democracy was not spread so large. It was started to spread only after the Second World War to a very larger extent. But this did not spread rapidly. First, there are certain countries which followed democracy up to 19th century. Later, in the 20th century, we have seen many countries turning towards democracy and the end of the colonialism. As the colonialism started to end largely after the Second World War, that gave rise towards a change of countries towards democracy. This changing of the democratic countries from non-democratic countries to democratic countries has been witnessed from 1975 to 2000 in a very larger scale. But still, today democracy expanded. Yes, it is a fact that democracy got expanded after 1975 to 2000 on a very large scale, but in some regions it got settled very widely, while in some regions it is still a newcomer in that continents. So it also brings to us that many are not democratic in the present day also. So many countries still do not follow democracy. We have kingship, we have monarchic rules, we have communist countries, which means that democracy still is not present in many other corners of the world. Yes, today 100 to 120 countries do follow democracy, but more than 50 to 80 countries do not follow democracy. That's why we are still learning and understanding what is the factors that are motivating the countries to move towards democracy. 1.3 Phases in the expansion of democracy. In the expansion of democracy, first we shall discuss how did the democracy got evolved. I think you remember, students, the French Revolution, the first chapter in your history unit. That is, in 1789, 14th of July, we have the French Revolution, where the French citizens have fought for the equality, liberty and fraternity. Now moving on to understand how the democracy got added to this one. France is always supporting the US, the Northern American settled people, to fight against the Britishers. So finally, in 1776, North America declared themselves as independent, and they got emerged and written a constitution in 1787 as United States of America. So that's how the first independent nation has come up. Now moving on to understand the concept of universal adult franchise. Universal adult franchise means that every individual, he may be a man or a woman, whoever attains a certain age prescribed by the constitution, let us say for example India, 18 years of age is prescribed by the Constitution of India. So whoever attains 18 years of age, irrespective of their caste, color, creed and then race or religion, region or anything else, they would be eligible to cast their vote. So by casting their vote, they directly participate in the politics of the nation. So they determine the future of the nation by electing the representatives. That's what giving equal opportunity to all the individuals in the society of that particular country, irrespective of all the barriers, is called universal adult franchise. It is also quoted as universal adult suffrage. So this clearly reveals for us that there was no equality till many years in many countries. That's how the concept has come, adult franchise. New Zealand was the only country until 19th century which has given equal respect and equality in terms of casting vote by 1893. Afterwards it was US. Afterwards we have Russia in 1917 giving this one. In 1918 we have Germany, the Weimar Republic has given this separation and equality there. But US, which we claim today as the world's #1 country or the big brother nation, could not give this equality till 1965. They were having the racialism of blacks and whites, and women were not given right to vote. So all these were ended up in 1965. The last country till date which has given the universal adult suffrage was South Africa. So the democracy started to spread slowly from one region to another region. After the Second World War, it reached to some other corners of the world. Later, it started to expand to the various other corners. Finally, democracy, wherever it starts to step in, the first basic principle which is required to claim that there is democracy in this particular country is the universal adult franchise. That's why this plays a very vital role. This is actually giving the meaning of equality. The real equality is being mentioned only when you have the right to vote irrespective of all barriers. That's what the universal adult franchise means. Now, the end of the colonialism. Dear students, colonialism has been impacting almost all the countries of Asia and Africa. So there is no country which has been left out or which has not been influenced by colonialism. So under the colonialism, many countries have suffered and struggled, and they have fought large battles against their colonial masters in order to achieve independence. In this process, after the Second World War, many countries were able to achieve independence. After achieving independence, like for example, in 1947, India got its independence. India took the step towards having democratic structure of government or democratic setup in the country. India followed democracy. India still is a democratic country, but the other countries in Asia and Africa do not have the similar experiences as we have. They have mixed of the experiences. They have faced certain problems. Let us take a small example of Ghana. Ghana also got independence in 1957, just a decade after India got its independence. And the leader who led this one was Nkrumah, who himself was a son of a goldsmith and he was a teacher by himself. So he actively participated against the anti-colonialism movements and he fought for the independence of the nation, and he got himself selected as a president of Ghana. In India, we have leaders who change through elections, but in Ghana, there was a different experience. Nkrumah was overthrown by the military coup in 1966, which is a clear disaster for democracy. Now, India has a different experience, Ghana has a different experience. So, all the experiences are not similar, and this also gives a question mark why democracy has not sustained at various places. Now, the recent phase, that is after 1980s, the approach towards democracy has grown a leap ahead. So now, the 1980s, we have seen many of the Republican countries of Latin America are turning towards democracy. Why are they turning towards democracy? For that, we should look at the global factors. One major global factor which made the other countries ease and come towards democracy is the disintegration of Soviet Union. Soviet Union's economy started to collapse from 1988, and finally in 1991 the Soviet Union broke down into 15 republican countries, which led to break of its monopoly control over its neighboring countries who follow communism, which we have seen example in the Poland, where in Poland they were actually following the communist regime, the Poland Workers' Party rule, where the Lech Walesa has broke down that one and created new history by winning 99 seats out of 100 and got himself elected as the president of Poland. And moving on to understand India's close neighbor boundary countries, Pakistan and Bangladesh. Pakistan and Bangladesh, which were initially held under the military rule, started to trend towards democracy by 1990s. In 1990s, Pakistan and Bangladesh had democratic elected governments. But in Pakistan, in 1999, General Musharraf has overthrown the Nawaz Sharif government, which is elected by the people, and then he went to mandate to the people, where he got a mandate of the people for 5 years and declared himself as the president with the people's support. So that's how from democracy again it moved back to the military dictatorship or statocracy. In the similar way, in Nepal, if you check, Nepal, the newly taken over king, who became the king after 2005, has dismissed all the political parties and the powers which they have gained after a lot of struggle. Still, they have fought their fight, they have raised their voices, and now Nepal is merging into a democratic and a republican country. They are in the process of concluding their constitution. Now, in around 140 countries started to merge into democratic countries, wherein the multi-party system came into existence. 80 countries which are completely irrelevant of democratic governments are turning towards similar types of democratic governments. One such country was Myanmar. Myanmar is located on the eastern border of India, which has its old name as Burma. Burma, or the Myanmar, the modern name of Burma, Myanmar, got independence in 1948 and was a democratic country till 1962. So 1948 to 1962, the 14 years of golden era of democracy sustained in Myanmar. Later, in 1962, we got the Military Coup Act done there, and which resulted in the dethroning of the elected democratic government and which gave rise to military dictatorship again. This military dictatorship was continued for more than 30 years, and Aung San Suu Kyi, who has been struggling for re-establishment of democracy and democratic values in the country, which gives equality for the people and gives a chance for the people to live happily in the country, has took a very long time, and 6 to 10 lakh people have been derooted from their houses. They left their homelands and shifted to somewhere else. The struggle of Aung San Suu Kyi has gained the international appeal, which brought her the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to restore democracy in Myanmar. So this is the new trend which is happening, and many countries are still struggling to establish democracy, which means that the best government of the modern era is the democratic government. We have various types of governments in existence in 16th century, 17th century, 18th century, 19th century, but the 20th century and the 21st century, the best alternative form of government or the best suitable government of the modern ideology, modern era, is the only viable alternative is the democratic government. Now, democracy at the global level. Students, democracy, when it starts to spread, we discussed that from 19th century, it started initially at few countries. Then the number became to more countries by 1950. After the Second World War has come to end, it started to spread on a very larger scale. So in the 20th century and in the 21st century, we have seen democracy expanding to 100 to 120 countries. More than 140 countries today are following democracy, but still there are 70 to 80 countries who do not follow democracy. Now, for India, we have an Indian government which looks after all the Indian affairs. For United States of America, we have a government which looks after all the affairs of United States. But who will look after all the world as one government or one authority who controls if someone does any mistake? If some country occupies the other country, who is there to stop them? Who will not allow one country to do authority on the other country? That's what gave the need for the world government, that is nothing but the establishment of United Nations. The United Nations, after a series of deliberations which happened after the Second World War, gave birth to United Nations. The League of Nations literally failed when the Second World War came. So we need a much stronger organization which can stop such world wars occurring in the future. This was a main motto which gave birth for the United Nations, a group of nations. Initially in 1945, 24th of October, at the San Francisco summit, had their meeting, and 51 countries have signed the Charter of UN, and thus the United Nations came into existence, which is still alive and functioning very effectively. Now moving on to understand how is United Nations working. Why is United Nations called as the World Parliament? In the United States, we have the total number of member countries as 193. Each member nation, as of dated 2012 September, we have 193 member countries. Each member country nation will have one vote in expression of their opinion, as we have in the Indian Parliament, as we have in the US Parliament. So, as in the country, democratic countries, we have this settlement or discussions happening with the voting structure. The similar way, any international issue can be discussed in the world body when it conducts its general meeting in every December. So, every country can put their opinions and cast their vote, so that basing on the majority voting only, we get the bill passed in the United States. Now, The next, what does the UN do other than the political solutions? International security. Whenever there is international security in threat, they try to solve the issues peacefully through negotiations. Then, economic development. Whichever countries which got independence after the Second World War decided to help them, so they have started to help them economically so that the infrastructure, the living standard of the people would increase in those countries. And they also started to work towards the establishment of equality in all the countries. The equitable society is a dream of the United Nations. Later, we also have UN Security Council, wherein in that we have 15 members, where 5 are the permanent members, 10 are the non-permanent members. The 5 permanent members have a special power called known as veto power. The veto power means which have that suppose the 193 countries are in meeting, and if any discussion is to be cancelled, though the other all countries agree, one country, the 5 permanent countries like US, UK, France, Russia and China would break the discussions and stop them abruptly using their veto power. That is a special power given only to the 5 nations in the UN. That's the reason why they are termed as the permanent members of UN. And in order to provide loans, we also have the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund is having nearly 188 countries as their member nations out of the 193 countries which are already members of the United Nations. Though we have 188 countries in the IMF, the 10 large countries like US, France, Germany, then Saudi, Canada and all the other respect to Japan countries have a larger stakeholders who decide for whom the loan has to be given and for whom the loan has not to be given. So, most of the times till date, conventionally, the US Financial Secretary only nominates the President of IMF. So, it is directly under the control of the US. So, IMF is also not truly independent, but still it tries to help the developing countries by providing certain amount of loans to build up their infrastructure. And further, moving on to understand how is democracy expanded in the modern days. We have a country called Iraq in 1932 which got its independence from the British in the West Asian region. After establishing its independence, it started to rule in a democratic procedure. But in 1968, a military coup happened and the Arab Socialistic Baath Party has took over the power. The word Baath means in Arabic as Renaissance, means a symbol of change. So, in 1968, the Saddam Hussein, who brought the Arab Socialist Baath Party to power, played a crucial role in this coup, and he started to influence the changes in the country. So, finally, in 1979, he became the president of Iraq. After becoming the president of Iraq, he started to rule the country in a dictatorship model. He started to give certain new liberties to the women which is not given in any of the Arab nations, and he started to rule the country on the lines like he do not tolerate any kind of arguments or any kind of voices against him. He started to kill the ethnic groups and massacred them literally and openly. All the political opponents of him were being targeted and were sent to jails. So these kind of things he started to raise, and the freedom of the press has been completely restricted. So that's how his rule turned to be a dictatorship rule. But in 2003, Britain and US raised an objection that Iraq is having a nuclear weapons with him. So, which was been rejected by Saddam Hussein. When UN team has visited there and checked, they could not find any evidences. But still, USA has attacked Iraq in 2003 and finally dismissed Saddam Hussein's government and established interim government there, which later UN Secretary Kofi Annan has criticized this one, saying that US attacking Iraq is illegal, which means in order to establish democracy or in order to propagate democracy, we need not wage a war against the existing country which is having certain set of rules. We need to create awareness among the people and then ask them to revolt against the existing system so that the systems would change, rather than waging a war against that and forcing the people and killing hundreds and hundreds of the soldiers, and finally you say that we are establishing democracy. That's the reason why UN has stated that US attack on Iraq is completely illegal. So with this we come to the conclusion of the lesson, the democracy in the contemporary world. Democracy, establishment, the phases of development, how the maps have changed, and finally how the modern day democracy expansions are happening. We have seen an example, even UN criticized that one. The international organizations criticize the moves of the veto power nations, but still the 5 veto power countries or the permanent members of UN were always been under the pressure of these nationals. Especially we have 2 superpower countries till last 20 years, that is US and USSR. USA and USSR were always in conflict with each other's ideologies, because US represents towards the western part and it is having the ideology favored towards democracy, while USSR is representing the eastern corner of the hemisphere and it is having the communist ideology in favor. So the communist ideology versus the democratic ideology, a Cold War continued from Second World War to 1990s till the disintegration of the USSR. This phase of 45 years to 50 years has been the period of colonial Cold War era. Post colonialism, we had the Cold War era where the 2 superpower countries used to take one side or the other side and start to fight wars on the name of the some other country. So this way they started to wage wars, and UN was just a spectacular till certain amount of time. It just became a spectator for many of the issues, though it knew that the things which are going are completely wrong, but could not stop them because they are permanent countries and they are also very, very powerful countries in the world. So yes, UN has done a great contribution towards the world's peace. It has also contributed, other than the political issues, started to contribute towards the education, towards the health issues, towards the development of the developing countries on a larger scale, but not to its full extent. So we need to understand here, still many countries have to turn towards democracy, and democracy itself, when it is proved, because when people started to ask questions to the democratic rulers, which means people started to understand democracy properly, which means that they have got awareness of what their rights are. That is the reason why democracy always have its own tests. There is no end for democracy until it achieves clear and crystal clear structure of administration and ruling system. That's all we have in this lesson. With this, we come to the end of this lesson of democracy in the contemporary world. Thank you.
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.